Never in the realms of human history has the way the world works been subject to such a rapid revolution and change. And this pandemic-driven drama has really had much more profound effects, it's fair to say, on the creative industries than many others. And that's because the creative industry famously regards its assets as its people, its primary assets as its people. And that's why many agencies have always said that their assets actually go up and down in the lift every day. So how do you cope when these assets can't even get in the front door? Well, it's such a huge question, because obviously the creative industries have had to worry about things like, creative collaboration. How do they maintain team spirit? How do they compete? How do they serve clients? These are all the questions agencies were asking themselves at the start of lockdown. But I think it's also fair to say now the dust is beginning to settle on the pandemic, and the worldview is beginning to clear. I think the shape of the new normal, which is beginning to emerge, might actually be better than what went before. So these are big, and these are profound issues. And that's why this series, which is called Today's Office, aims to really understand and make sense of this brave new world. Every episode, we're going to be joined by either a leading creative person or a leading creative leader who is going to tell us about how the pandemic impacted them personally, how it changed the way they sought to manage creative teams, what they believe are the real lessons for the future, and of course the role technology has played in all this, because the role of technology has been really fundamental. And that's why I'm delighted to say that this series is done in partnership with Adobe. Now, Adobe have not only made remote working more possible because of the technology, but it's also accurate to say they have made this little series possible too, which I hope you really enjoy. Now, to get going, I'm delighted to say that the Drum's very own Imogen Watson is in conversation with the famous Sir Martin Sorrell.
So thanks for joining me today. Where are you coming to us from?
I'm here. I'm at home in London. I came back from America, so I'm quarantining at home.
Oh, wow. So you've had a bit of an unusual pandemic working experience in the sense that you actually carried on working from the office. So can you just tell me about the setup you had there?
Well, I didn't carry on totally. I mean, I was at home when there was a lockdown. I mean, our people actually took the government advisories quite seriously. Our people are really digital natives. I mean, of the 5,000 or so people that we've in the company now, I think they were, most of them, if all of them, were accustomed to working 24/7, not necessarily at home, but they were embedded in clients, or they were working on in-housing programs inside clients. So they're much more flexible. Our people, because they're more from the tech area, the platforms and the software companies and the hardware companies, they tend to be on the younger side. So our average age is around 20, 29, 30. And they've been accustomed to working flexibly for many, many years. In fact, in a way, what's happened in the pandemic was only really an acceleration and continuation of what was happening before. So flexible working, flexible living, flexible commuting hours, hybrid, a hybrid model. That's become the fashionable word now. But I anticipate that although we've got tremendous variation in working patterns, in Asia Pacific, which is about 10% of our business, I would say probably half of our people are back. In Europe, in EMEA, maybe it's probably about 10, 20, 25%. And in North and South America, much less than that. But the answer to your question is really that we've always had a very flexible workforce, very adaptive workforce, and our hybrid model. We'll move, or we are moving to probably 3 days in the office, flexible commuting times, flexible working time, dispersed working, dispersed living it's going to be a much more different model. And if jobs allow, if the nature of the jobs allow and the nature of the position allows, people will be able to work at distances from the office, and will encourage that if it makes sense. There may have to be variations in compensation as a result. Our people will appreciate more flexibility in what they do and how they do it, and we see that with the platforms that we deal with and the hardware companies and the software companies.
And you talk about this hybrid way of working. So what does this mean, do you think, for city centres and offices? You know, we come from Shoreditch right now and it's so quiet. It's very different to how it was, 13 months ago now.
Well, the jury's out on that. I think some city centres will suffer. Whether, London will be opened up fully, and
Fingers
we'll see
crossed.
what happens. London is a different place today than it was a few weeks ago. But office patterns are going to shift. I mean, our office space is going to change quite dramatically. We operate in about 56 office locations in 31 countries. I mean, we're committed to one location in each city in which we operate in. But the nature of that space is going to change. We'll have space for people to work in. We'll have space for people to meet their colleagues in, and we'll have space where they can meet clients. So the nature of the space is going to be very different. And because of more flexibility in working, we'll probably have lower space requirements. That will have an impact on cities in relation to the question you asked about what's going to happen to cities. Office blocks, high office blocks with elevator banks, have to have staggered elevator trips. That's going to be very difficult. So I think you are going to see in the change of the nature of office space and the way we utilize it, and maybe the nature of office blocks. Maybe high rises will not be as popular. Canary Wharf, for example, will that be as popular as it has been historically? I doubt it. I don't think people will want to be incarcerated in tall office buildings. They'll be looking for different layouts and different approaches. I think overall, we'll see a shift in the pattern of city living and city office development. It may not be as marked as we thought, maybe, but I think some cities will win and some will lose.
And of course, S4 Capital was built for digital. So I wonder if you could talk about some of the opportunities that going virtual has brought.
Well, we this time last year, we were in a pretty frantic state, maybe a little bit earlier than the beginning of May, probably the end of March, the beginning of April. We were obviously extremely worried and running all the disaster scenarios. With the benefit of 2020 hindsight, we've surpassed even the most optimistic of those scenarios. But we pivoted very quickly in three directions. We sort of animation, robotic production was the second, and the third was the conversion of live events to virtual events, which continues to be the trend. I mean, one of the things that comes out of the pandemic is that there will be, I think, fewer trips, but longer trips. So I'm due to go to Asia in August, and I'll probably go for 2 or 3 weeks instead of what I used to do, which was probably go for 3 or 4 days. And I think that's going to be the pattern, because what we've learned is you can do whatever you do from a distance. You don't have to be traveling as extensively and rapidly as before, and the technology has improved. And we're at the beginning of the improvement of technology in terms of Zoom or Google or Microsoft or whatever, or Facebook. I mean, all those companies are developing their systems. I think actually companies have become better run as a result of the pandemic. I think authority and responsibility has been pushed down the organization. In our own case, what we saw was a rise, as I say, of animation, robotics, and conversion of live events to online events. and it's not going to go back to where it was.
No.
I mean, we will not do as much traveling, at the drop of a hat, and we'll be using technology in a much more effective way, particularly as that technology improves.
Particularly for things like conferences and events, because obviously before people would have travelled across the world to go to an event, but I've definitely seen conferences just get better and better this year. Would you say that technology is enabling us to get more connected? There's more people who can actually go to these events now?
Yes, it is, but I do think, my own experience is, we were talking about this just yesterday. I mean, the last thing that we need is more conferences. I mean, when you physically go, you commit yourself to going. You might be looking at your iPhone whilst you're in the conference hall, but your attention is grabbed more. When you're doing it virtually, your ability to sit in front of a screen virtually all day is much more limited, even if the content is really superb. But you're not going to sit in your office or at home looking at this content all the time. It is recorded, you can access it later, and it's much more variable. So the nature of which people, they're probably snacking more instead of sitting through all of it, or attempting to sit through it physically whilst at the same time doing your email or nipping out to take phone calls. So I think the nature of the interaction is different if you're in the office watching it rather than physically there. But I think generally it's going to be to the good, because I think there are too many conferences. I think we spend too much of our time doing that, and there are too many excuses at the drop of a hat for conferences and travel, and there's a tremendous wastage. And we've all seen our margins improve during the course of the pandemic. So people are going to be much more selective about the experience, and they'll use technology in a much more effective way. And we've, in the course of the pandemic, we've been appointed to projects or AORs or what we call partner records over Zoom. And we've bought companies, we've merged with companies over Zoom, and these are people that we've known and we've had for face-to-face contact with before. But I think the nature of interaction has changed as a result of the pandemic. It may go back to where it was in the long run. This may be a short, medium-term phenomenon. I don't think so, but there is an argument that it may go back, and once we get used to travel on a more consistent basis and less restrictions. This experience was so severe and so concentrated in such a short period of time that I think it has materially affected people's habits and thinking, and they will be different in the long run too.
And I guess lastly, really, what key lessons you've learned from that sort of experience this year that you'll take forward?
Well, I think our tagline is faster, better, cheaper, or speedy value, which is slightly more elegant. And I think what the pandemic has just underlined is the really effectiveness of those two slogans. I mean, or one slogan in two different forms. Agility, understanding the platforms, with Google's decision on cookies, Google's decision on IDFA, first-party data and the walled gardens become more important. And the importance of efficiency, whether you call it cheaper or value, that efficiency is absolutely paramount. But the lessons are really that I think speed, quality, value, or faster, better, cheaper really does resonate with clients. And we've seen an acceleration of digital transformation that will continue, even as GDP sort of eases off in 2023. We'll have a strong 21 and 22, but 23, it'll revert, I think, probably to the pre-pandemic norm of maybe 2 to 3% a year. But even in those situations or those conditions, economic conditions, the need for digital transformation and disruption will continue. So what we in the pandemic at a consumer level, as we've educated our kids online, taken our financial services online, had in-home games and entertainment, and bought our essentials and groceries online for the first time. All that will continue at a consumer level. The changes that you know well of at the drum in terms of what's been happening to the media, the pressure on free-to-air networks, the rise of the streamers, the decline of traditional outdoor, the rise of voice and podcasts, like all these things have been the decline of newspapers and magazines in their old form, in their analog form. All those things that we were well aware of being accelerated. And last but not least, enterprise companies, big companies and small and medium-sized companies, have understood the growing importance of digital transformation and the need to accelerate digital transformation and disruption. So those disruptors are being given, those change agents inside companies are being given more and more oxygen to implement the change that's needed. So the pandemic has just accelerated the change that was there.
For sure. It's been a very disrupting year, and I guess now is the time, it's the most interesting, is the fallout and what's going to stay and what's going to change as we sort of lead out of the pandemic. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insight. I'm
Pleasure.
very excited
Pleasure.
to see and follow what's going to happen for the next 12 months. Perfect.
Hope it all helps.
That's all we have time for. Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of Today's Office, produced in partnership with Adobe. If you enjoyed this, there's plenty more where it came from, so please visit the Hub for more.